Hello and welcome to Badaptations.
Monsters and green-head and neck bolts, we think we all know this spooky tale by Mary Shelley. Badaptations.
We are very happy to bring you a special Halloween episode featuring a book that is near and dear to Amy's heart.
Yes, Frankenstein, applause. This is a really good time to do Frankenstein, not only because it's Halloween, but also because 2018 is the bicentennial anniversary of the first publication of the novel. We're not just going to be talking about the novel, though I could definitely do that for hours. I don't think anyone else is interested. We're going to be talking about the novel and then two films, so our special Halloween edition. We're going to be talking about the 1931 adaptation, Frankenstein, and then your favorite.
Mel Brooks's 74, Young Frankenstein. So it's basically a Frankenpalooza? Frankenpalooza. Looking at these really cultural to the point where McDonald's has made Chicken McNugget Frankenstein's monsters. So it's pretty entrenched in pop culture.
So, we'll begin with the novel, written by Mary Shelley in 1818. Well, actually, she wrote an early draft, but first published in 1818, not originally under her name. It was attributed to her in 1823, and then a second edition in 1831. The summary, it's a really complex novel, so if you've only seen the film, or haven't even seen the film, if you've sort of just heard about Frankenstein through pop culture, reading this for the first time might kind of shock you. It starts off with this guy named Robert Walton, and he's an explorer, he's a failed poet. So he's on this expedition. It's like an icy, foggy, frosty night. He sees this figure off in the distance that looks like a man. The next day he meets Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein is like close to death, and he starts telling his story about this awful thing that he's done. He reanimated this collection of dead body parts into a creature, which we know as the monster. And then as he's telling his tale, so frame within a frame, we get the creature telling his story to Frankenstein. The creature is trying to explain his existence and how he's been poorly treated by the world. The creature asks for a companion because he's lonely. Victor Frankenstein agrees to make the female creature in like some moment of compassion, but then he realizes the implications of that, tears the female creature apart, and then the creature vows revenge. So this sort of brings us back into the outer frame, the Walton frame, and the creature has been pursuing Frankenstein, and spoilers, Victor Frankenstein dies, and the creature vows to build a funeral pyre and kill himself at the North Pole.
And so the two films that we'll be discussing, very brief summaries because most of the summary is going to come out of what we discuss.
Yeah.
But the 1931 film features Boris Karloff.
Dog in the distance.
Werewolf. If you don't get that, go watch Young Frankenstein now, stop the video, and then come back.
But anyways. The 1931 is directed by James Whale, presented by Carl Lemney. It's a loose adaptation, I guess, but it was adapted from the Peggy Webling play. So we're talking about an adaptation of an adaptation. And she is the original one to attribute Frankenstein's name to the creature. So a lot of confusion if you call a monster Frankenstein, that's coming from Peggy Webling and then through the film. Yeah. So the pop culture version is from that.
So for kind of a brief summary, it's important to establish that the Frankenstein 1931 film completely messes with the names. And this seems why is this a thread in everything that we talk about? Nobody keeps the names.
I was doing some, again, nerdy research, but I was looking into like copyright stuff. Mm-hmm. And so for Dracula, which was the other 1931 film that Universal Classics did, they had to change all the names because Bram Stoker's wife held the copyright to Dracula, and we'll probably do a Dracula at some point. Dracula's great, and there's so many adaptations. So we'll go into that more in those other videos, but I was wondering if there's some kind of copyright issue. It's public domain already, so they didn't have to make any of these changes.
But so in the film itself, instead of Victor Frankenstein, we have Henry.
Which, okay, so maybe we can get there from the book. So there's Henry Clerval, who is Frankenstein's best friend, but another one of the changes is we get Fritz.
Fritz.
Who's Fritz?
Who becomes Igor in the later films.
So Fritz is like the hunchback.
He has kind of like a little hump on his back.
What
and he's
hump?
a very and he's kind of an asshole.
So he's the assistant. The novel is really just Frankenstein working on his own, and that's actually really important because the isolation sort of drives him mad. But we get the like asshole assistant in Fritz, and that carries on through I think all the Frankenstein adaptations, except for maybe I saw this one adaptation. Well, I saw like 10 minutes of an adaptation with Kenneth Branagh, and it's real bad. What are some of the other changes?
So there's a happy ending at the end.
Yeah.
So everybody comes out alive. Victor Moritz, so not Frankenstein, his friend, somehow lives but then disappears.
Yeah. There's this weird like Twilight triangle. I know Twilight is way after this, but like there's this weird love triangle. It's just weird. He disappears like despite having the hots for Elizabeth.
There's a grandfather there, and then like the movie ends almost like a romantic comedy, like screwball comedy, where he like has alcohol and he like has this thing about they're going to have grandchildren now, yay.
So again, a short summary of the film. We have the basic stuff. So there is a monster, there is a mad scientist, there is an Elizabeth, but everything sort of gets simplified. So it begins with a funeral. We see Henry Frankenstein lurking with his assistant. They end up digging up that coffin. They find that it's damaged, the body's damaged somehow. So they go and find like a hanged man, some kind of criminal, and get him, and he's also damaged somehow. They have to get a brain. I think this is one of the iconic scenes of the film that has carried through all the Frankenstein adaptations, where Fritz gets sent into this laboratory and there are two brains. So the professor there has been like displaying a perfect brain, a genius, and then on the other hand, a malformed criminal brain. And Fritz drops, as he hears a noise in the distance, and he drops the good brain, and because he's like just like a bumbling asshole, he grabs the other brain and just brings it back to Henry Frankenstein, doesn't tell him. So they put that brain in the creature. Elizabeth, some professor, can't remember his name, and then Victor Moritz, they're like concerned, and they go find Henry Frankenstein in this secluded castle where he is working on his monster. So he brings the creature to life. And again, this is one of the iconic things about the film, is that the novel doesn't really go into detail or, visual description of the science. So they have all this like equipment and, the sort of like balls of like static light and the like moving levers and stuff. So that's all from the 1931 film. And so he brings the creature to life. It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! And it's really Fritz that antagonizes the creature, waves fire in front of it, and the creature, maddened, kills Fritz.
Like hangs him. Somehow the creature decides through sheer force to like think through the process of hanging, and then hanging him.
Yeah. And so this is the interesting thing too. I didn't really think about this before, but like he'll have to understand like tool usage, like how to use a rope.
How physiology works.
Yeah, so this implies that he's actually intelligent, but the rest of the film you can't tell that. This is the major difference, right? So he doesn't speak. He just growls.
It's the cutest like little dinosaur noise.
Yeah. But in the novel, he is eloquent. He's more eloquent than any other human you meet in the novel. So that is the major difference. And we should have mentioned, actually, the subtitle of the novel is Or the Modern Prometheus. So if you know a little bit about the myth of Prometheus, is he brings fire to humans from the gods. Jumping ahead a lot, Elizabeth and Henry Frankenstein are to be married, and on their wedding night, the monster shows up.
And this is directly from the book.
Right. Oh, I did skip over a part where the monster has killed a little girl by accident.
And this actually was cut out of the original film because of the Hays Code. So apparently a little girl being thrown into the water was unpleasant enough for Hays Code to say, nope, not happening.
So there's sort of an ensuing witch hunt, monster hunt. And meanwhile, there's this sort of huge wedding celebration. The monster shows up, he finds Elizabeth and he goes like, "Rawr," with like the eyebrows. And she screams, faints, and the ensuing hunt for the monster, the villagers end up trapping him in this windmill and they set it on fire, and presumably the creature dies. But yeah, we get a happy ending.
Yeah.
Henry's, I think, still alive. He's been thrown out the windmill, but he gets caught.
Yeah.
Elizabeth is still alive. Victor's somewhere doing something. So all the humans, except the little girl,
And
live.
Fritz.
Yeah, and Fritz.
So in 1974, which is like, what, 43 years after this 1931 film came out, we have the Mel Brooks Young Frankenstein with the screenplay written by Gene Wilder. And so it's important to note that before this came out, Gene Wilder was in what were known as flops, Willy Wonka and the Producers, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Because those are not flops. But back then they were. He'd written screenplays, but this was his first official screenplay to film adaptation. And he wrote it with Mel Brooks, who around the same time was doing Blazing Saddles. So we have these great comedies coming out at the same time. And the movie is actually really fascinating because it's its own story. So the title Young Frankenstein comes from the fact that we are not with Victor or Henry anymore. We're actually with the grandson of Frankenstein, and he is declaiming all heritage, and he is Frankenstein.
You're putting me on.
And naming becomes kind of a huge joke throughout the film. So instead of Igor, we have Igor.
You must be Igor.
No, it's pronounced Igor.
Oh, and instead of Victor, it's Frederick.
Well, why isn't it Frederick Frankenstein?
It isn't. It's Frederick Frankenstein.
I see.
Basically, we see this kind of conflict of Frankenstein's grandson trying to decide to get away from his heritage, figuring out that he can't escape it, finding his grandfather's book, How I Did It, by Victor Frankenstein, and creating his own creature. And the creature, who is played by Peter Boyle, is completely different in the sense that we still have an abnormal brain.
Would you mind telling me whose brain I did put in?
And you won't be angry?
I will not be angry.
Abby someone.
Abby someone. Abby who?
Abby normal.
Abby Normal.
I'm almost sure that was the name.
But we still have Elizabeth, but we now have Ingrid, who's an addition, and it's kind of this like voluptuous comic relief throughout the film, and Frederick's love interest. Yeah, so it actually plays out pretty similar to 1931, and it's playing off of all of the other Frankenstein films to come out of its Universal.
During the village assembly, one of the authority figures says,
"We still have nightmares from 5 times before."
On the DVD commentary track, Mel Brooks says that this is a reference to the first 5 Universal films.
Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein. There's so many in-jokes in that film related to the original and the other 4 movies that came out. Frederick can't escape his heritage. He creates the creature. The creature, he actually loves the creature when it's first created. He thinks of it as a child.
Now, lock.
And then it develops, a fear of fire. And then Frederick discovers that the creature is made with the abnormal brain that Igor accidentally messed up. So like a direct reference to the film. Yeah. He escapes. He doesn't kill anyone, does he?
Oh no, there's actually a play on that, because so somehow word gets out that the grandson is now doing another creature thing. So everyone's preparing.
I asked you to put Helga to...
And so the girl's just out at a well or something. The girl's out.
It's set up to be a direct reference with, like, they stand over the well and you're like, oh, we know what's happening.
Yeah, and she throws flowers into it, which references the 1931 where before he throws the girl into the water, she's playing with flowers and she throws her flower into the water and he sort of just picks her up and throws her as well. She's throwing flowers and there's like a cut right there and you're like, oh my god, what happened? But then they're on like a seesaw.
Sit down. Sit down.
So in Young Frankenstein, he doesn't kill the girl.
The film itself ends not unlike the 1931 version, but very different from the book in the sense that there isn't a whole bunch of angst and sorrow and sadness.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, no, very different. Elizabeth meets the creature and discovers the creature has a very large penis.
Oh my god.
And that's like a giant joke throughout. The creature is salvaged, so the abnormal brain is transformed through this transfusion with Frederick. So part of Frederick's brain goes to the creature, and part of the creature's penis goes to Frederick. So there's this weird body kind of sharing, and so at the end, Frederick ends up with Inga, then the creature ends up with Elizabeth, and we have this happy ending.
Come over here, you hot monster.
That's a play on Bride of Frankenstein, which is actually interesting because when the Bride of Frankenstein, played by Elsa Lanchester, who also in Bride of Frankenstein plays Mary Shelley in the beginning.
What of my Mary?
She is an angel.
You think so?
But the Bride of Frankenstein sees the monster and freaks out.
The creature becomes incredibly eloquent.
The Young Frankenstein film.
He's able to speak, so we see him at the end. He's like domesticated and he's got little glasses on and he's reading a newspaper in bed.
And there's also a funny scene in there where Frederick is presenting his creature to the public. They sing Puttin On the Ritz.
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
So just to note, the cast is pretty important because the cast is just like pure comedic genius.
Really great.
So we have a really young Cloris Leachman, our golden girl.
I am Frau Blucher.
And then we have Marty Feldman playing Igor. We have Gene Wilder playing Frederick Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
We have Peter Boyle playing the creature. Madeline Kahn playing Elizabeth, and then Terry Garr playing Inga.
Oh. Hello. Would you like to have a roll in the hay?
Yeah, so it's a really great cast. And the 1931, Boris Karloff walks out of this with like a great character. And this is the image that we have today of Frankenstein, or the monster.
Speaking of looks, maybe this would be a good point to jump into the design and construction of the creature in the book and also the creature in the films.
So in the novel, Victor Frankenstein has, in the middle of a storm, stumbled upon these books of alchemy, like Cornelius Agrippa, and he's really gripped by these works. He decides, oh, I'm gonna study this. His father basically just scoffs at him, but sends him off to Ingolstadt for university. He stumbles upon the idea that he can create life while he's studying chemistry and biology, and he goes to these charnel houses. He also grave robs.
Which isn't that uncommon, especially when bodies were scarce and you needed to perform dissections to understand anatomy and physiology, but the charnel houses, to put the pieces together is a bit odd.
Yeah, so he pieces together body parts from different men, and he vows to create like the most perfect creature that will worship him, be more indebted to him than man is to God. He decides he's going to make a creature of a gigantic stature because it'll be easier to sort of work with the veins.
Victor intentionally picks the most beautiful pieces, and so like technically it's the creature is this puzzle of beauty. Like all the pieces are beautiful, but when they're together, there's something not quite right.
Yeah, there's something weird about it. Like Frankenstein has no problems with the creature when it hasn't been brought to life yet, but as soon as he gives a spark of life, he runs out, abandons the creature, and when he comes back, the creature has run off. So he He's basically just like abandoned this newborn child.
There's a few important scientific elements that come out of that. So you have galvanism and vivisection. Like vivisection is dissecting something alive, and galvanism is this idea that you can bring things to life. And so Shelley was like a scientist. She was brilliant.
Yeah. And this is also what makes a lot of people call Frankenstein the first science fiction novel, and I would tend to agree with that. So like science fiction scholars and writers like Brian Aldiss have definitively said Frankenstein's the first science fiction novel. To think that like she was 17 years old when she wrote the original story. So the fact that science fiction as a genre was started by a 17-year-old girl, I think is pretty badass.
And another element of science that comes out of this is the idea of criminality. The 1931 version itself comes from this idea of Lombrosio's, I'm saying this wrong, so we'll put this on the screen. The idea that criminality could actually be detected in the face and in the brain. So you could weigh a brain and you could look at malformations in the brain and that could tell you that that person's a criminal. And we see this in the 31 film with the brain demonstration.
And here the abnormal brain of the typical criminal. Observe, ladies and gentlemen, the scarcity of convolutions on the frontal lobe as compared to that of the normal brain.
And we also see this in the way that Karloff's makeup and kind of face are framed. So you see kind of the very wide forehead, you see the wide nose, and so criminality was indicated by these abnormal facial features. And then this transforms in the 74 Young Frankenstein film, the Peter Boyle face.
Yeah, he's got a sweet face.
It's so sweet, like it's so cute, he's just like... You want to pinch those cheeks. And so that changes from looking at the criminal to looking at the blood. And the focus is on the Frankenstein and Frankenstein blood and whether Frederick can avoid that blood.
Destiny! Destiny! No escaping, that's for me!
But there's this really interesting scene where Frau Blücher actually says, well, it's in the Frankenstein blood.
That music.
Yes! It's in your blood. It's in the blood of all Frankensteins.
And attributes the same blood that Frederick has to the creature. So you start to wonder what blood are they sharing, and this is before the kind of transfusion at the end of the film. So you see the creature inextricably linked biologically with the creator. Young Frankenstein is its own plot. It's not a direct adaptation. It borrows a lot from the book and it borrows a lot from the 1931 film.
So the origins of the Frankenstein story are kind of interesting. Basically, Mary Frankenstein,
Whoa, Freudian slipping?
Yeah, Mary Shelley, wow, that was great. I
kind of love that.
Yeah, that'll be my drag name. She had eloped in 1814. So 2 years prior to the initial draft of Frankenstein, she eloped with Percy Shelley. She went on a trip with Percy and Lord Byron and Lord Byron's doctor, John Polidori. Yeah, they went to Switzerland where Frankenstein is actually set. They decided to have a ghost story writing competition. Mary Shelley's the one who ended up finishing hers and like creating a masterpiece. But also Polidori wrote the first vampire novel, and that's The Vampire, spelled with a Y. So anyways, even though with this like backstory, there's some contention about who really wrote Frankenstein. Some white dude scholars have decided that really it was Percy that wrote Frankenstein and it's his greatest novel. And then others have said that the 1831 revision is actually William Godwin's, which is Mary Shelley's father. So all these people who are just interested in like saying a woman couldn't possibly write something this good.
No, our tiny woman brains make it impossible. We like shiny things.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, Mary Shelley wrote other books, which are just as beautifully written. She wrote The Last Man, which is a really interesting premise, too. And I think it's bullshit that men are like, but no, it was written by a man. Go away with your fragile masculinity.
And to further add insult to injury, the 1931 credits list the novel by Ms. Percy Shelley. She's just identified by her husband.
When I saw that, I was like, no! Like, the woman has a name. Use it.
So I guess one final thing that we could talk about is the way disability is used in the novel and in the films. And the idea of visually cueing disability, especially in the Mel Brooks film, it's used for comedic elements, right? So we have Marty Feldman actually had a thyroid condition that made his eyes kind of bulge. And that's played up to show kind of his visual difference.
Damn your eyes!
Too late.
We also get the prosthetic hump, which actually was this sight gag that was improvised where Marty Feldman moved it slowly until somebody actually noticed that it was shifting sides. So again, we have disability kind of played up for comedy. We also have the blind monk. So in the book and in the 1931 version, we have the creature kind of being triggered and frustrated and going on his rampage because of fire and cruelty and being ousted from the world. But in the Mel Brooks version, he kind of is enraged because this blind man who is trying to be friends with him keeps spilling really hot stuff on him.
We tend to forget the simple pleasures that are the basis for true happiness.
Do you have your cigar? Let me see. Let me see.
And then we also have the creature's possible intellectual capacity being this center of comedy. And in the 1931 version, it's the center of fear, this giant body with this mind that is seen as less than the normal mind.
And so in the novel, we have the gigantic stature. So scholars like Leonard Davis have said this is a perfect example because the creature is an interruption to the visual field. So you automatically know that the creature is different because of its huge size. And so it'd be interesting to read the creature as a critique of how we treat people with disabilities. I mean, there's a moment where Victor like almost creates what the creature is asking for in this female creature, and then he decides to tear the creature apart is because he's afraid that the creature and the female creature will reproduce and create more creatures like them. It's like a eugenicist fear.
And I mean, this predates eugenics, this predates even Darwin's origin of species, right? So this is fascinating that these are fears that are coming up that aren't even being articulated yet fully in the scientific world.
So our ratings. We'll start with the 1931 Frankenstein and then after that give our ratings of Young Frankenstein. 1931, it's a classic and it's definitely been a huge influence on pop culture, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it's a Badaptation. Because again, we're talking about adaptation from book to film, and in terms of that alone, it oversimplifies too many things. For me, it feels nothing like the book. In terms of horror film, I think you should still watch it, but adaptation.
This sounds really hard. I'm gonna be controversial and say adaptation. It's not a good adaptation in the sense that it's doing a really nice job with the text itself, but it does almost transform the original story into its own. And I think that's really unique. I think the characters are interesting, except for Elizabeth, who could have been a lamp, and she still would have functioned the same way. But other than that, I think the creation of the mad scientist, these stock characters who are somewhat fleshed out in the 1931 film, become their own story. And I think that's what makes an adaptation good, is taking the source material and creating something new. And this does do it. I think the film itself is really engaging and fun to watch, even though we have really complex horror now that's very self-referential. It's still going back to 1931. It's an engaging film. Adaptation, not amazing, but still pretty good.
And it's a classic for a reason, and so we should definitely watch it, but you should also definitely read the novel. And then for Young Frankenstein, this is unequivocally a good adaptation. Like, a great film, just so fun, and so intelligent. It draws on so many films, but it also, I mean, creates magic of its own, like the whole Frau Blue Hair.
Yeah, so I 100% agree. It's incomparable, of course, because you have some of the greatest actors. It has a very Monty Python-esque tone to it, especially Marty Feldman's Igor. There's so much. But it's also, like Amy said, it's its own story, so it doesn't depend on just reproducing, which a lot of parodies tend to do. This one actually creates its own story, creates its own characters that are pretty fleshed out, and just, yeah, brilliant sight gags. There's a lot of jokes in there that happened on set, and those are the ones that really create the beauty. It's a great film.
So, good adaptation for you as well?
100% good adaptation.
So, as always, we really appreciate you watching our videos. If you could give us a like, a thumbs up, that'd really help us. And then also, if you could subscribe and tell your friends about the video, share it on your Facebook, other social media, that would be great.
We're always looking for suggestions, so please feel free to drop us a comment.
So anyways, thanks for watching.
Happy Halloween!